Thank you. Can you hear me? Am I? Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. My life as a lesbian just seemed normal. I considered it an enlightened, chosen path. Lesbianism felt like a cleaner and more moral choice. Always preferring symmetry, I believed I had found my real self. As a professor of English and women's studies on the track to becoming a tenured radical, I cared about morality, justice, and compassion. Fervent for the worldviews of Freud, Hegel, Marx, and Darwin, I strove to stand with the disempowered. I valued morality. And I probably could have stomached Jesus and his little band of warriors if it were not for how other cultural forces buttressed the fierce triangle of God, patriarchy, and politics. Pat Robertson's quip from the 1992 Republican National Convention pushed me over the edge. He said, "Feminism encourages women to leave their husbands, kill their children, practice witchcraft, destroy capitalism, and become lesbians." My life at this time was happy, meaningful, and full. I was not seeking the Lord. My partner and I shared many vital interests: AIDS activism, children's health and literacy, golden retriever rescue, our Unitarian church, just to name a few. And even if you believe the ghost stories about gay and lesbian folks promulgated by Robertson and his ilk, it was hard to argue that my partner and I were anything but good citizens and caregivers. The GLBTQ community values hospitality and applies it with skill, sacrifice, and integrity. I honed the hospitality gifts that I use today as a pastor's wife in my queer community. I began researching the religious right and their politics of hatred against people like me. To do this, I began reading the Bible while looking for some Bible scholar to help me wade through this complex book. I took note that the Bible was an engaging literary display of every genre and trope and type. It had edgy poetry, deep and complex philosophy, and compelling narrative stories. It also embodied a worldview that I hated: sin, repentance, Sodom and Gomorrah, absurd. At this time, the Promise Keepers came to town and parked their circus at the university. On my war against stupid, I wrote an article published in the local newspaper. It was 1997. The article generated many rejoinders, so many that I kept a Xerox box on each side of my desk, one for hate mail and one for fan mail. One letter I received defied my filing system. It was from the pastor of the Syracuse Reformed Presbyterian Church. It was a kind and inquiring letter. It encouraged me to explore the kind of questions that I admire. Ken did not argue with my article. Rather, he asked me to defend the presuppositions that undergirded it. In his letter, he described Jesus as someone who entered into history, not someone who emerged from it. I thought this was insane. I was a historical materialist, and I believed that people proceed from history and are shaped, for good or for ill, by the culture that molds them. I didn't know how to respond to his letter, so I threw it away. And later that night, I fished it out of the department's recycling bin and put it back on my desk, where it stared at me for a week, confronting me with the worldview divide that demanded a response. As a postmodern intellectual, I operated from a historical materialist worldview, but Christianity is a supernatural worldview. Ken's letter punctured the integrity of my research project without him even knowing it. If I was going to understand how this book, the Bible, got so many people off track, and how this man Jesus persuaded so many people to follow him, then I needed to understand Christianity as a supernatural idea. At this point in my life, the category of the supernatural was reserved for Stephen King novels. Ken's letter did not mock, it engaged. So when his letter invited me to dinner at his house to discuss these matters more fully, I accepted. My motives at the time were clear. Surely this would be good for my research. But something else happened. Ken and his wife Floy and I became friends. They entered my world. They met my friends. We did book exchanges. We talked openly about sexuality and politics. They did not act as if such conversations were polluting them. When we ate together, Ken prayed in a way that I had never heard before. His prayers were intimate, vulnerable. He repented of his sin in front of me. He thanked God for all things. Ken's God was holy and firm, yet full of mercy. Ken and Floy omitted 2 important steps in the rule book of how Christians should deal with a heathen like me. They did not share the gospel with me at that first dinner, and they did not invite me to church. Because of these omissions to the Christian rule book, I knew that when Ken extended his hand to me in friendship, it was safe to close my hand in his. I started meeting with Ken and Floy regularly, reading the Bible in earnest, with pen in hand and notebook in lap. It was, after all, good for my research. I read The Way a Glutton Devours. I read it many times that first year in multiple translations. The text started to take on a life and a meaning that startled me. Dinner gathering that my partner and I were hosting, my transgendered friend Jay cornered me in the kitchen. She put her large hand over mine and said, "Rosaria, this Bible reading is changing you." I felt exposed. I felt like I was going to throw up. I collapsed in the chair and I exhaled. But Jay, what if it's true? What if Jesus is a real and risen Lord? What if we are all in trouble? Jay exhaled deeply and sat down in the chair across from me. Her eyes looked wise, but her makeup made her look distorted to me for the first time. "Rosaria," she said, "I was a Presbyterian minister for 15 years. I prayed that God would heal me, but he didn't. If you want, I'll pray for you." The next day, when I returned home from work, I found 2 large milk crates spilling over with theological books, Jay's books. She was giving them to me. In Calvin's Institutes, in the margins of the exposition of the book of Romans, in Jay's handwriting was a warning: "Watch Romans 1. This is where I will fall." Romans 1, 21 to 26 suddenly looked like the table of contents of my life. This is what it says: "For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, and of birds and of 4-footed animals and crawling creatures. Therefore, God gave them over in the lust of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator. And for this reason, God gave them over to degrading passions, for their women exchanged the natural function for that which is natural." I took a good look at the verb clauses here. Did not honor God, did not give thanks, engaged in futile speculations, became fools, exchanged the incorruptible for the corruptible. God then gives us over to our lusts. When we look at the world through our lusts, we dishonor our bodies and we worship the world. This verse seemed to provide a haunting literary echo to Genesis 3, where Eve's desire to live independently of God's authority made perfect sense to me. If I were Eve, I would have done the same thing. And at the same time, Eve's seemingly innocent sin, eating fruit after all, served as the leverage for the whole world to come tumbling down, fierce and fast, bloody and brilliant. After years of this, something happened. The Bible got to be bigger inside me than I. It overflowed into my world, and I fought against it with all my might. And then, one Sunday morning, 2 years after I first met Ken and Floy, and 2 years after I started reading the Bible for my research, I rose from the bed of my lesbian lover, and an hour later, I sat in a pew at the Syracuse Reformed Presbyterian Church. I don't say that to be lurid. I say that to remind all of us that we have no idea the journey that people walk to get to church. We have no idea. Conspicuous of my butch haircut and my jeans, I reminded myself that I came there to meet God, not to fit in. Ken was preaching through the Gospel of Matthew, with its bewildering cast of characters and problems, separated unto the gospel, seeds choked by the world, feeding thousands with some nameless kids' bread and fish. Then Jesus' cutting question to impetuous Peter, quote, "Do you still lack understanding?" Followed by Pastor Ken's steel blue eyes and a long pause before he turned this question on us. "Congregation, did Christ ever say this to you?" he asked. This startled me. This was my question. This question was for me. Do I still lack understanding? Who is speaking here, the man behind the pulpit or the God-man behind the foundation and the redemption of his people? Yes, no. What am I thinking? The image that crashed like waves in a raging sea of me and everyone I loved suffering in hell just vomited into my consciousness and gripped me in its teeth. Not primarily because we were gay, but because we were proud, we were autonomous. It was our hearts first, our bodies next. I got it. I heard it, finally. And I fought with everything I had. I did not want this. I did not ask for this. I counted the costs, and I did not like the math. This was my crucible, and this is my crucible. If the Bible is true, then I was dead, and if the Bible is false, then I'm the biggest fool on earth. But God's promises rolled in like another round of waves into my world. I wanted God to show me on my terms why homosexuality was a sin. I wanted to be the judge, not the one being judged. Perhaps I thought, like Eve in the garden, I wanted to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil so that I could become and replace God. And I wondered, hadn't I already tried to do this? Hadn't we all? Did I really want to understand homosexuality from God's point of view? Or did I just want to argue with him? I prayed that night that God would give me the willingness to obey before I understood. I prayed long into the unfolding day, and when I looked in the mirror, I looked the same. But when I looked in the mirror of the Bible, I wondered, am I a lesbian, or has this all been a case of mistaken identity? If Jesus could split the world asunder, divide the soul and the spirit, judge the thoughts and the intentions of the heart, could he make my true identity prevail? Who am I? Who will God have me to be? I still felt like a lesbian in my body and in my heart. That was, I felt my quote-unquote real identity. But what is my true identity? I read the Bible many times through. If I finally could become honest with myself, I would have to say that I saw for myself that it had a holy author. I saw for myself that it was a canonized collection of 66 books with a unified biblical revelation. The fog burned away. The whole Bible, each jot and tittle, was my open highway to a holy God. My hands let go of the wheel of self-invention. I came to Jesus alone, open-handed and naked It was a crushing revelation. It was Jesus I had been persecuting the whole time. Here was the other crushing revelation. My conversion hurt many people. I could write a whole book with the title, quote, "What My Obedience to God Costs Other People," unquote. I can do the body count of those I love who were pressed and mangled by the consequences of Christ's call on my life. In this war of worldviews, Ken and Floy were there. The church, who had been praying for me for years, was there. Jesus triumphed, and I was a broken mess. I lost everything but the dog. I speak today about matters that happened over a decade ago. I'm now a wife and a mother, but I don't necessarily believe that that is the punctuation mark of my personal journey and healing. I don't want to minimize it, but I don't want to maximize it. God separated me unto the gospel to reveal his Son in me, not to show what a delightful wife and mother I can be. Am I healed? Yes. The gospel and the fellowship of godly women coached and nurtured my heart and my mind. Am I changed? Yes, from the root. And it was painful, and it was powerful. So, and we did. We became friends. And it wasn't quick. I remember someone saying, "Wow, that's great that Ken, witnessed to you for, wow, how many weeks did it take?" Yeah, weeks? Years. And so I think that as Christians, we have the fortitude to be good friends, to genuinely be good friends to folks outside of our church community. And I would love it if we committed right here tonight. And I'm grateful that my readers have seen that this is not a book about conversion from homosexuality to heterosexuality, because you know what? That is just too small of a story. All right, that is not worth me leaving my husband and kids in Virginia and getting on a plane and wearing something that isn't my usual homeschool mom garb, and you know what I'm saying? It's too small. It's too small. Who is Jesus? What price did he pay? Who knows the depth of his love? We need to focus more on that, and focus also on, as we're meeting people, that we should not give up on people. We should not. Ken Smith did not take me at my word when I said I'm a lesbian. He said, "Uh-huh." That didn't faze him. That wasn't mean that he was dismissing my struggle. Not at all. Not even a little bit. But that he chose to see me as a child of God and to proceed from there. Well, I struggled. My sin of homosexuality, I struggled with, at first I struggled with, well, why is it a sin? And that was mostly a baiting question. So I had to give that up for a little bit. But it struck me, especially in working through the Bible, reading it and rereading it, that the biggest sin of all was pride and autonomy. And so I wondered, I just wondered, well, what if my real sin isn't what everybody sees, but what if my real sin is pride? Kent has really helped me to see that we do not do people a service when we understand them in the category of what they do. right? That's very much what the world does, right? That's what the DSM does. That's what our therapists may do. But that's not a real service. If you are a child of God and you happen to be falling into this sin and you want to cut it at the root, you need to go to the root. And the root is pride and autonomy, or at least that was what I really came to understand for myself. But again, these are things that happen when you read the Bible in these big chunks. And so I always encourage people to do that, to spend a long time with the Word, to not be a verse-a-day Christian, but to be deep in it, to give it a real commitment. Jesus is your friend. You need to spend time with him, real time, listening, and that's right here.